Arnold Raymond Cream, Joe Louis Barrows, two Hall of Fame heavyweight champions, born the same year, 1914. Similar circumstances. Joe Walcott's mom had passed away, and at the age of 16, he turned professional. Joe Louis, his dad, had been admitted into a mental institution. 2 years later, he passed away when Joe Louis was 2 years of age. Amazing story between these two men. Ages 17, Joe Louis be an amateur star in 1934. Win the Golden Gloves in all the inner city tournaments. As for Arnold Raymond Creed, he took odd jobs because he had a family that he had to support. Both men had the same trainer, Jack Blackburn. I'm Scrapbook Boxing. I want to get into these two men, their careers and their fights, similarities, time in which they came. Let's do it right here on the Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuffs series. Arnold Raymond Cream was born January 31st, 1914 in Merchantsville, New Jersey. Now, his dad was born in Barbados, and he died when he was 13 years of age. Arnold Raymond Creed decided to drop out of high school and help provide substance for his family. So he began working odd jobs until one day he ran across a gym called Mac's Gym in Camden, New Jersey. Now, he was a skinny young man and not a natural fighter. However, he hung in there for several weeks until he began to learn the basics of the art of fisticuffs. Began fighting in clubs in southern New Jersey, as well as Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And at the age of 16, Cream turned professional. It's a location called Violin in New Jersey, not too far from Atlantic City and Blackwood. Now, this happened in 1930 against Cowboy Wallace. Now, Raymond would celebrate his first fight with a first-round knockout. He continued as a professional, 5 more fights, and he would lose in a rematch to Henry Taylor on November 16th, 1933. Now, over the next few years, Joe moved over to Philadelphia and became a student of the legendary Jack Blackburn. Joe would work at odd jobs, and between jobs, Blackburn would fly over to Chicago and meet a young amateur star by the name of Joseph Louis Barrows. Now, meanwhile, Jack Blackburn had conversations with Cream, and he explained to him, are you going to take boxing 100% seriously? Because you're in and out of the gyms. I know you have to provide for your family. But I'm in it to try and train fighters to become the very best they can be. And I've been offered an opportunity to perhaps train a future heavyweight champion of the world. I would like for you to come along with me. The location is Chicago, Illinois. And Joe couldn't make that transition because of his family. He couldn't make that commitment, so he didn't go along. And this was in the 1930s. Now, Joe Walcott would on 4 separate occasions fight top 10 opponents. He faced Al Latour, a Jewish heavyweight that would be no match for Joe Louis in the future. 1936, he would face Tiger Jack Fox. 1937 and 1938, Abe Simon. 1940. Now Walcott wanted to leave boxing and focus on taking care of his growing family. But Felix Bacchicino convinced Jersey Joe Walcott to continue boxing and even deciding to buy his family food and coal and whatever their needs were, while Walcott would get back into the ring. 1945, 3 of them against top 10 fighters. Fighters such as Joe Baskey and Lee Q. Murray, as well as Curtis the Hackman Shepard. Jimmy Bivens, Leoma, Madison Square Garden. He lost to Joey Maxim and Elmer Violent Ray. Back and forth bouts. You see, now Jersey Joe Walcott was a very, very, very good fighter. Knew all the tricks of the trade, understood the basics. But he was a non-committed foe because of his family. He wanted to take care of them, do the honorable thing. Meanwhile, Joe Louis on the other side of town was a committed fighter. Learned the basics and learned how to handle himself. Understood balance by the tutelage of Jack Blackburn, as did Joe Walcott. And Joe Louis would be in the ring sparring with Walcott on several occasions. Now, like Larry Holmes, along with Muhammad Ali later on in life, Jersey Joe Walcott would study the pattern of Joe Louis. He knew his weaknesses. He understood balance that was taught by Blackburn. He understood throwing the punch where the hand is and where it's been placed. However, Jersey Joe Walcott understood not dropping your hands after you throw a jab. He understood how to turn after a punch was delivered. Created the Joe Walcott shuffle, where he would feint one hand and turn the opposite direction and come back and counter. Joe Louis never learned those tricks. He was a robotic, basic, however, one of the most deadliest punches in boxing history. Short 6-inch punch, balance and foot control, consistent movement, knew how to block his punches. But he always had that old habit of dropping his jab. Now, Mike Jacobs in late 1947 would offer Walcott an exhibition bout. And the bout was about to take place until the commission got involved. New York SAC, State Athletic Commission. And they said any bout over 6 rounds would be considered a world championship title bout. And since the venue was already sold out, and Walcott had threatened to sue, they had to go along with the match. And Jacobs didn't see any threat. He didn't feel as though Walcott, who was in and out of the boxing ring, taking jobs, lost a few fights along the way, making somewhat of a comeback, would be any threat to his money-making machine, Joe Louis. And so it became a world title bout. 1947. 18,000 in a crowd. Two of the most stand-up guys in boxing. Same age, same trainer. What a story this would tell. Walcott would be masterful. He understood the timing and the foot position of Joe Louis. Now, although Joe Louis has slowed down, he had performed over 100 exhibitions during the war. Between 1942 and 1945, he would have 2 heavyweight championship bouts between Abe Simon and Buddy Bear, donating both to the Army and Navy Relief Fund. Meanwhile, having over 100 exhibitions with world-class fighters. Some of them, of course, journeymen. Some of them were military men. But he was also in the ring with fighters who were in the top 10 at one point in their career. And by the time he got to Joe Walcott, Joe Louis actually should have retired. He would get dropped twice. And at the end of that contest, the referee was Ruby Goldstein. And he would look into the eyes of Joe Louis. And he would be saddened because he knew that Joe Walcott's hand would be raised by him. And when the decision rendered, and he had to raise Joe Louis's hand, that was the first time that he was ashamed to raise Joe Louis's hand. Because he knew that Walcott pulled it off. And he also knew that Joe Louis's reign had ended. Now also Joe Louis it had been said by Walcott, whispered into the ear of Joe Walcott, stating, "I am so sorry, Joe." And Joe Walcott supports this claim by telling everyone to look at the tape and see Joe Louis whispering in his ear and looking around in sadness of all the boos, of everyone getting up and walking out. Because Joe Louis tried to climb out of the ring before the announcement was even made. He had a robe over his head, actually a towel. And he went back to the locker room. And he sat on the table and he cried. And it reminded him of the night that he got knocked out by Germany's Max Schmeling in 1936 and Yankee Stadium, because he felt as though he let not only himself but his fans down. His mother told him on a porch with violin in hand that if you're going to enter this game, give it all your thought and all your heart. And first and foremost, don't ever disappoint yourself or your people. And so Joe Louis wanted nothing else but to give Walcott a return match. He was always a stand-up guy in that regard. You see, Marty Monroe and Frank Forbes were the 2 judges who were paid to give Joe Louis that decision. Ruby Goldstein had given it to Walcott. Following year, on June 25th, Jersey Joe Walcott would be giving a second opportunity at a shot that he's been dreaming about all of his life. Joe gets the opportunity to face, once again, the world heavyweight champion, Jersey Joe Walcott, and Joe Louis. Their names linked as one. But this time, things would be different. This time, Louis has decided to focus on the style of Walcott. From the boos and the disappointments that he felt once before in 1936 against Germany's Max Schmeling. He said he would never allow this to happen to him again. And he took it to Walcott, decided to take place and take charge right away, like a true professional that he has always been. Now Lewis would get hit with a counter punch, but immediately his instincts was to punch back, and he would catch Walcott in the middle of a combination and an exchange. And Joe would catch Walcott, and down Walcott would go, struggle to get up, but he was knocked out. And once again, Joe Louis, proud man that he always been, would hear the crowd rooting for him. On June 22nd, 1949, Walcott would get a third opportunity at the heavyweight honors and a bout with Ezzard Charles for the vacant NBA belt. Ezzard Charles would defeat Joe Walcott. 1950, he faced Rex Lane on November 24th. He lost his first rematch on March 7th, 1951. Now, Ezzard Charles would face Joe Louis in 1950. Charles was the NBA heavyweight champion. Joe Louis had retired. And because of tax issues, and everyone telling Ezzard Charles he was not the true champion until he faced Joe Louis to solidify his title. Joe Louis would make a comeback and lose a 15-round brutal contest. It was a sign at that point that Joe Louis was done. July 18th, 1951, Walcott made boxing history by knocking out Ezzard Charles in the 7th round. Unbelievable left hook that would flip Ezzard Charles upside down as though he was doing a backward roll, to become, at that time, the oldest heavyweight champion in boxing history, since the game of pugilism would begin. 1952, Jersey Joe would defend his title, his NBA heavyweight championship strap, against Ezzard Charles. Then in 1952, later on that year, he would have to face the Brockton blockbuster, Rocky Marciano. Now, Joe Louis, Joseph Louis Barrow, was born in Lexington, Alabama. He was born May 13th, 1914, and he died April 14th, 1981. I've never had the pleasure of meeting Joe Louis, but I did meet Jersey Joe Walcott several times. But I can remember a moment when I met him at a Mike Tyson fight. He was in a lobby. And Joe Walcott, he was pretty much by himself at that point, and I had a chance to speak with him. And I asked him, I said, about that Joe Louis fight, 1947, and about the Joe Louis fight in 1948. What do you most remember? He said, young man, I remember Joe Louis was one of the greatest fighters of all time. I knew it when I got in the ring with him the first time. He said, I knew Joe Louis back in the 1930s. We had the same trainer, Jack Blackburn. And when Joe Louis got on that heavy bag, I knew then he would be a champion. And he explained the punching power and how Joe Louis would drop his hands to throw a punch, as well as after he punched. He said his balance was impeccable. His IQ was 100, had the heart of a lion, and when he hit that heavy bat, you can hear it clear across the gym. And he only threw it 3 to 6 inch from the start of impact. He said, we had the same trainer. His name was Jack Blackburn. And he fought the likes of Joe Gans and Sam Langford, as well as Dave Holly. Trained likes of Sammy Mandel and many others. He said, when he trained me, I knew I had someone special in front of me. And Joe Louis had that opportunity for the duration of his career up until 1942 when Jack Blackburn would pass away. Manny Seaman would take over Joe Louis's career. And he told me, don't ever let anybody tell you anything negative about Joe Louis. He says, because they will not know what they're talking about. Joe Louis was one of the greatest heavyweight champions in boxing. And this was at this time. This was in 1984. And Mike Tyson turned professional the next year in 1985. I always remember that. It was in Lake Placid when the 84 Olympic team was getting that team together. I had a conversation with Jersey Joe Walcott. I couldn't make this up if I wanted to. Amazing. Joe Louis had a mother by the name of Lily. She remarried a man by the name of Patrick Brooks. He had 5 children of his own, and they had to sleep 3 in the bed. Joe would walk barefooted to school and had it hard coming up, as did Walcott. Little did he know, before his passing in 1942, Jack Blackburn would have a champion who would become the second black heavyweight champion of all times. His 2 proteges would face each other 1947 and 1948. Joe Louis, the Brown Bomber, and Jersey Joe Walcott. Unbelievable. That's a moment I would never forget, the conversation I had with Walcott. And I had the pleasure of meeting many old-time greats. The respect he had for Joe Louis was as precious as a family member who would tell you stories about special moments in their life. Joe Louis, Jersey Joe Walcott, 2 of the greatest fighters of all times. Both faced Marciano when they were past their primes. Both faced Eddie Charles. Both faced each other. Thanks for listening. This is Scrapbook Boxing, Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuffs series. All great fights and all great fighters would never be forgotten on my channel. I have Joe Louis ranked number 7, all times. And he could have been ranked higher had it not been for the war. Defended his title 25 times. 11 years in 11 months. Could have accomplished a lot more. So when you make comparisons to Joe Louis, it's not a fair comparison. Never truly got an opportunity to defend his title more times than he has. Muhammad Ali, the same thing. Very difficult to do so. You can only compare them with what they actually accomplished. And if you look at the highlight reels of Joe Louis, combinations that he put together, the balance, foot control, the way he dropped his hands on his opponent's chin from where the hand was. One of the most devastating body punches, head punch combinations of all times. Sugar Ray Robinson admired Joe Louis. Muhammad Ali admired Joe Louis. Jersey Joe Walcott admired Joe Louis. My dad told me that Joe Louis was his idol. They don't make fighters like that anymore. So we can only study and appreciate what they have accomplished. Salute to these great fighters. Thanks for your time. Peace.